Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to Coffee Talk! Okay, so it's kind of hard to make coffee talks with the whole World War III thing going down and all that. And it's hard to talk about stuff like Bigfoot and UFOs and time travel. Don't. That's what we're talking about, John Titor, today. One of my favorite topics on the channel. I have, however, come to the conclusion that John Titor is more than likely not a time traveler. But what he definitely is, if not a time traveler, is a very inventive, creative, and probably high IQ individual who made a series of predictions. If you don't know who John Titor is, just pause the video and go find somebody on Titor. But essentially, he talked about a future in the United States where Civil War and World War III were happening at the same time. So if he's not a time traveler, and I think he's probably not enough coffee to swallow that one. I wanted it to be true. I totally did. The sci-fi kid in me. But at the very least, John Titor predicted some things that appear to be, although not in the same time frame, they appear to kind of be happening. So it's very possible that John Titor was at the very least a highly intelligent or group of highly intelligent people who engineered this hoax for the purpose of projecting their predictions and seeing if they would come true. So in the John Titor timeline, you have, of course, this happened many years ago, according to John Titor in his timeline. You have a civil war and World War III kind of happening at the same time. He doesn't spend a lot of time talking about what led up to the situation. He basically says there was an election that was disputed, and at some point there were two presidents because neither side would accept the results of the election, and an inevitable civil war broke out. And he said essentially it was a war between the country people, the rural people, and the city people. And he didn't really explain where the U.S. government was all in this. It all kinds of falls apart. He kind of ties it to an event that caused a crash of the internet. Of course, in this timeline, he claimed that it was Y2K that kind of caused it, and caused a breakdown in society, but also a world war. He says there was a world war in Europe, and it kind of bled over onto the United States and caused and worked with these other elements to create this division and this open warfare between rural people, basically the red states, and the blue states, the urban people. And so it got me thinking. I did a video, it's been about 5 years ago, where I predicted, or I didn't predict, I claimed at the time that World War III and the Civil War were happening at the same time 5 years ago, because I could see the writing on the wall. And, my prediction record, as being another person who, I don't hide it behind fake time travel, but I do like to predict what's next. And many of you that follow the channel know that I've rightly called a lot of what's happened in the last few years since the creation of this channel in 2017. And but the things I get wrong is the timing of it. If you go back and look at some of those predictions, I thought it would happen a whole lot faster. It would roll out quicker. And that's kind of what you see in the John Titor story. In his timeline, he predicts some things that are supposed to pretty much immediately, within 7 years of his predictions, come true. And of course, they didn't really at all. Now, having said that, they are kind of now, right? It starts to look like we're seeing a division in the United States, and we were very much at the edge of a civil war potentially breaking out. A lot of people were using that language, talking about it. I myself was included in that. And then you had the war in Ukraine, which caused deeper divisions. And now you have this crazy splintering of everyone over this Israeli and Hamas-Palestinian issue. And now there's talks of a draft in the United States. And some of the videos coming from the left, from Generation Z, they range from disturbing to hilarious. You've got young girls who are basically turning their back on women's rights. One of them said, "Look, I don't want equal rights. I want special treatment," and they're ready to give up all of their work they've done towards the woman's rights and equality and all that to go back to being housewives and mothers, so they don't have to go fight in the war. And there's a whole bunch of videos about how they don't want to be drafted. And part of this is because there was legislation that's being passed around for some time now about potentially adding women to the selective service program and making them register for the draft. And now you got these wars popping out. If you watch the channel, you know I've done the math. And we're outnumbered against pretty much any nation when it just comes to the size of our standing army. Right now, we have one of the smallest standing armies since World War II in our own country. Compared to previous years, it's very small. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 400,000 active duty from all the different branches. And to give you some idea, right now, Turkey, who is saber rattling, is their standing army is somewhere in the area of 355,000 in a standing army. So man for man, person to person, we're kind of equally matched there. And Turkey is the second largest army in NATO. And everybody says America has so much advanced weaponry, we don't need a lot of warm bodies, we don't need a lot of personnel to have superiority. And there is something to that, except now our enemies are also getting that same technology, and many of them have superior numbers. So the idea of a draft is something that I think if we get involved in a real war, if the thing in Ukraine and what's going on in Palestine and Israel combine, if the Arabs end up invading Israel and we have to defend Israel against, say, Turkey or Egypt, or Saudi Arabia, or a coalition of any of those countries, even Iran, then potentially we would have to have a draft. If we get into any kind of conflict where we have a significant loss of personnel through the acts of war, then we have to replenish those troops with new personnel. And they can't get volunteers. So we have this issue where it looks like if we get involved in much of anything, we're going to have to immediately begin a draft in this country. And the big question is, you take this disbelief in the legitimacy of elections that's coming from both sides. In 2016, Democrats accused Donald Trump for 4 straight years of having been in collusion with Russia to try to affect the election. And they claimed that he couldn't have got elected unless he cheated. And then in 2020, the same thing is being said about Biden and the Democrats. So right now, it'd be safe to assume that nobody really believes that elections are legit. They believe that elections are being interfered with and could be interfered with. So that leads us up to 2024. That's next year. In fact, what is that? 1 year from now will be an election in this country for president. And man, there's so many things going on there. Who's to predict whether Biden will run again or not, whether Donald Trump will be allowed to run or not, whether he be taken off of ballots or even arrested. And then on top of that, you've got this slew of different people on both sides now that are announcing for 2024. And this could end up being a really chaotic election. And we could easily step into the prediction now made by John Titor, where there's an election where neither side accepts the results. Each side claims their person is their president. We almost got that in 2020. And now in 2024, it appears it's more likely than ever. And at the same time, we've got all the workings of World War III. Now, once again, because the timeline is off in the prediction, you can't really, I think, reasonably argue that John Titor was a time traveler. You can do the multi-worlds concept, where when you go back, you create a new universe because you went back in time, and that we're on an alternate timeline. Then that starts to play into theories on the Mandela effect, maybe being a product of people tampering with the timeline and creating new universes, or maybe CERN splitting the universes. Without going there, it's kind of hard to prove or even believe that John Titor was actually a time traveler. And I'm tending more now to lean towards John Titor being a genius, right? Being a guy who looked at world events, put things together, probably could have written an amazing novel. But having been a guy who's written, I've tried to write novels. I've got one or finished and a couple almost finished, and I gave up on them because it's just so hard to do the actual writing part. Spinning a yarn, telling a story, making up a timeline or a series of events is easy, but the conversational part of writing, he said, she said, he remarked, she returned to, he was shocked, when you're going back and forth, keeping all of that straight, it's why it takes a lot of education, honestly, to be a good writer. You got to have a lot of English classes. And even then, it has to have a certain amount of talent. And I do better doing this. I'm better at just spinning a yarn face to face, telling a story. And so, John Titor, though, I mean, that story is amazing. Great, make a great movie. And the only thing is now it wouldn't seem like science fiction. It wouldn't seem like a futuristic movie. It would seem like they're talking or making a movie about what's happening right now. Because we do appear to be in a position where the unity in our country is so fragmented. It's so shattered. And now you've got the right fighting amongst itself over everything from who they're going to choose for Speaker of the House to whether or not we should give aid to these other countries or get involved. You've got people on the right calling for bloody war in Israel and for us to start bombing Iran and just wanting to blow up this whole thing in the Middle East. You got others that are saying we should stay out of it in the same party, right? And now you see the same division on the left over the Palestinian issue. You've got liberals who have more sympathy and empathy for the Israelis, and you've got liberals who see the Palestinian plight and what they've been through, and they're choosing sides over foreign matters. And we already had all this division, and now it really starts to look like the scenario that John Titor spoke of over 20 years ago now, going on 25 years ago from his first contact to Art Bell. That instead of stuff taking place in the 7 years he predicted it in, that the same stuff is actually happening. It's just taken 25 years to get there. Don't. At the very least, whoever John Titor was, whoever wrote those storylines, they saw things. They saw the writing on the wall. They predicted the events that are currently going on to some degree or another. And so what Titor had happen was this civil war basically over an election layered with the beginnings of World War III in Europe caused America to have this breakup. And then our enemies saw us fighting amongst ourselves. And according to the Titor timeline, the Russians, who saw that their problem was mainly the liberals from the blue states and the major cities along the coastline, nuked the cities along the coastline, and then just backed out of America and didn't invade and left us to our own devices. And that a rural, community, family-based, religious-based, low-tech society kind of springs out of this. And by 2036, they have kind of a cohesive lifestyle, which would have been at his point 38 years in the future from the first Titor posting. So it didn't happen at that rate of speed, right? However, many of the things he talked about, a total disillusionment with elections, each side accusing the other side of cheating in the election, a division between rural America and the city folk, the blue and the red states, and then a war potentially in Europe. I don't believe Titor talked about the Middle East. He talked about the war starting in Europe. And I guess technically, if you were looking at this from a historical perspective, if the Israeli thing blows up into a regional conflict over there and Russia gets involved, already sore about what we did by arming the Ukrainians, that you could have a war that would be perceived historically as a war originating from Eastern Europe, which is Ukraine is in Europe. Turkey is in Europe. Turkey's part of the NATO alliance, and so it's really odd that this person seemed to have, for the most part, picked up on some of the cues that made him predict things that within a 25-year period would eventually come to pass. Did he get the rest of it right? Are we going to get into open warfare between urban and rural people, between red and blue states, a Republican, Democrat civil war? Is it going to be more fragmented than that? Is it going to be brother against brother in more than two factions, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 factions, different splinter groups fighting with each other, essentially civil unrest, the breakdown of society? And what happens when we do get into some kind of war in the Middle East or in Ukraine or some other backwater place, and we start to encounter losses, or we write a check our butt can't cash militarily, and we have to engage in a draft? Are these Gen Zers going to fight for their country? Many of them are like, I'm not going. I'm going to run away to the mountains and hide out. Yeah, you probably better just to go ahead and join, because hiding out in the mountains is probably harder than being in the military. As a guy who spent some time in the mountains, yeah, it's easier to hide from a human enemy than it is to hide from Mother Nature. She's waiting around every corner to make your life miserable or end it altogether. Take my word for it, I've been there. So is there going to be this mass exodus like in Vietnam when the draft happened? Because if people back then didn't want to fight, I can't see a divided nation being able to produce enough willing people to go and fight for their country, fight in some war they don't believe in, some war they may be morally opposed to, or just morally opposed to the idea of war, or just socially not engineered to do that sort of thing, and want to run away to the woods or go to Canada. Many of you don't know that if it wasn't for dodging the draft, Cheech and Chong would have never got famous. They literally ran from the draft to Canada and became famous up there, and when the smoke cleared, they were able to come back to the United States. So draft dodging, draft riots, one of the biggest riots in New York City history was around the Civil War, when they went to draft Irish immigrants to fight for the Union, and they flat refused and had a giant draft riot. So could we see the potential draft, for instance, combined with this disillusioned idea of the elections not being legit no matter who wins, the idea of rigged elections, the disagreement over what war to be involved with? There is also this element of us literally writing actual checks that our American butts can't cash, because we're getting deeper and deeper in debt. We're spending at a ridiculous rate. We're sending billions and billions of dollars to other countries for their wars. Every time they drop a bomb, we pay them back for the bomb they just dropped. We give them a new one. And there's got to be an end to that as well. So you've got social breakdown. You've got a total disillusionment with elections. You've got crooked politicians from every direction. You got people involved in open gaslighting. You've got a press that's controlled and manipulated. This Israeli thing is one of the clear evidences of that. There are just certain things you're not going to see at all talked about in American press, but you switch over to the BBC or Al Jazeera or Australian news, and you get a whole lot of stories about stuff that Americans should know about that isn't being talked about in our press, because our press is controlled. This kind of equals up to everything coming together in the right order to cause the kind of chaos that could bring down a country and bring us to the position that is talked about by John Titor. Was John Titor right? I don't believe he was a time traveler, but man, he was good at predicting stuff. And like me, he thought it would happen a lot faster. He thought it would happen back then. It's stretched out longer. I thought we'd be in a civil war a long time ago, but I clearly overestimated the ability of people to just go on as normal and ignore bad stuff, right? And they clearly can just ignore bad stuff and keep going to work. And I didn't think that was possible, but here we are. But sooner or later, the other shoe's got to drop. Sooner or later, stuff is going to start really flying apart at the seams. And my question is, John Titor clearly predicted it. So whoever that guy was, he was highly intelligent. He gave us a handful of advice for the post-apocalyptic world. He said, have a weapon, learn how to clean it and maintain it, learn how to purify water, learn basic backwoods sanitation, and he just said learn some survival skills and have some tools. And so is it survivable though? I mean, if things go down that path and nuclear weapons start flying, are we all just gone? And of course, I know my rapture folks will say, Jesus will stop it before it gets much worse. I don't know. People have been saying that for thousands of years, and definitely all through my lifetime. I'd like to take some of those greatest generation people, if I could, and go back in time, like Bill and Ted, snatch a couple of them and bring them to our present and see what the heck they'd have to say about what's going on in our country. I think they would just be absolutely in shock. Some people would think that the technology would be a surprise to them, but really they hoped we'd have flying cars by now. So I think the technology probably wouldn't be as nearly as shocking as the cultural changes, as the change in marriage roles and gender roles and the role of our country in the world, how we're perceived. They would be shocked at what's going on internationally and domestically, politically. And yeah, we're definitely gone down a weird rabbit hole here. What do you think? Do you think we're headed for that simultaneous civil war, civil unrest, breakdown of society, combined and coinciding with a World War III? Like I said in my video 5 years ago, World War III and Civil War happening in America now. You can find that, I think, in my most popular videos. And like Titor, I didn't get the timeline right as far as how long it was going to take for this to play out, but in it, I basically had Russia having enough of us, and the left, who I was most aware of at the time, pushing towards civil unrest, pushing towards violating our constitutional rights or doing away with the Constitution, potentially being involved in election rigging, the accusations against Russia for being involved in our elections. All that was going on 5 years ago while Trump was still president. 5 or 6 years ago when I made that video. But honestly, that headline still holds up today. Are we looking at World War III and Civil War happening at the same time, just like Titor predicted? Well, you tell me what you think in the comments section. Don't forget, this channel doesn't receive any money from YouTube. It's funded by viewers like you. If you appreciate these videos, if you appreciate the entertainment value, also the spiritual instruction, or the World War III updates and my political outlooks, please support this channel so I can pay the bills around here, keep the lights on in my little cabin in the woods, and keep making videos for your enjoyment and benefit. Right on. Okay, well, we'll see you next time on Coffee Talk.